I used to think that saying yes all the time was the price of being loved. You want me to stay late and help with that project? Sure, no problem. Need a favor on my only day off? Of course, I'm happy to. I'd say yes so fast you'd think it was my life's mission to keep everyone else comfortable. But here's the thing. I wasn't happy. I was exhausted, resentful, and if I'm honest, a little invisible. I spent so much time anticipating everyone else's needs that I forgot how to ask for what I wanted. Almost like my wants didn't matter. And here's the kicker. No one was forcing me to do it. I was handing over my time, my energy, my voice, without anyone even asking. And I know I'm not alone. Research shows that people-pleasing often starts early. Many of us are taught, especially women, that being easygoing and selfless makes us more likable. But here's what the data also says. When we prioritize pleasing others over expressing our true needs, we damage our relationships and ourselves. Because you can't build real connection on a foundation of unspoken expectations and silent resentment. So why do we do it? And more importantly, how do we stop? People-pleasing isn't kindness, it's armor. Let's just sit with that for a second. Because if you've spent most of your life bending over backward to make everyone else happy, that sentence might sting a little. I get it. For years, I believed that being agreeable, saying yes when I wanted to say no, smoothing over disagreements, was just being a good person. I thought it was kindness, but it wasn't. It was fear dressed up as generosity. The truth is, people-pleasing isn't about being kind. It's about being safe. It's a form of emotional armor we put on when we're afraid of being rejected, misunderstood, or seen as difficult. And like all armor, it's heavy. It weighs us down. It makes it harder to move freely and even harder to be fully known. If you've ever found yourself saying yes when every part of you is screaming no, you know exactly what I mean. Maybe it's agreeing to plans you don't have time for because you don't want to disappoint a friend, or volunteering for one more thing when your plate is already full just to avoid the awkwardness of saying, I can't. On the surface, these things might seem small, but over time, they add up. They chip away at your sense of self until one day you wake up and realize you're living a life built around everyone else's needs except your own. And here's the kicker. When you're stuck in the habit of people-pleasing, it doesn't just disconnect you from what you want, it disconnects you from who you are. I remember a conversation I had with someone who told me, I don't even know what I like anymore. She had spent so many years prioritizing other people's happiness that when I asked her a simple question, what do you want? She froze. She had no idea. And not because she didn't care, but because she had learned to bury her own desires so deeply they felt out of reach. And here's the thing, we're not born that way. I've never met a 3-year-old who struggles to express what they want. If a kid wants the red cup instead of the blue one, you're going to hear about it loudly. Kids are clear, they're unapologetic about their needs. But somewhere along the way, many of us learn a different message, especially women. We're taught that it's better to be liked than to be honest, that being easygoing is safer than being clear. And before we know it, we start confusing people-pleasing with kindness, and we forget how to ask for what we really want. But let's be clear, kindness and people-pleasing are not the same thing. Kindness is grounded in truth. It's choosing to be honest, even when it's uncomfortable. It's believing that your needs matter just as much as anyone else's. People-pleasing, on the other hand, is rooted in fear. The fear of disapproval, conflict, or being seen as selfish. And when you make decisions based on fear, you might keep the peace in the moment, but you sacrifice a little piece of yourself every time. And it's not just emotional. The research backs this up too. Studies show that chronic people-pleasing, constantly suppressing your own needs, can lead to increased stress, anxiety, and even burnout. When you're always anticipating what other people want, your nervous system stays on high alert. You're constantly scanning the room, reading cues, adjusting yourself to fit what you think others expect, and that takes a toll, not just mentally, but physically. And here's the paradox. The more you people please, the harder it becomes to have real relationships. You can't build meaningful connection by hiding your true feelings. You can't expect people to know you, really know you, if you're constantly editing yourself to fit their expectations. When we people please, we rob others of the chance to love us for who we really are, not the polished, agreeable version we present. So what do you do with that? How do you start peeling off the armor and showing up differently? It starts by asking yourself a simple but powerful question. What do I actually want? Not what's easiest, not what will make everyone else comfortable, but what do you honestly want? And when the answer comes, trust it. Even if it feels messy, even if it feels selfish, because here's the truth. Asking for what you want is not selfish, it's self-respect. And yes, it's going to feel awkward at first. If you've spent years prioritizing other people's needs, speaking up for yourself will feel unfamiliar, maybe even wrong. That's normal. Discomfort is the price of admission to a meaningful life. And the people who truly care about you, they won't leave because you set a boundary. In fact, they'll love you better when you stop making them guess how to. The world doesn't need a more polished, agreeable version of you. It needs the real you. The one with honest desires and clear boundaries. Because when you show up that way, not out of fear, but from a place of truth, you give other people permission to do the same. And isn't that the kind of connection we're all craving? No one can read your mind. I used to believe that if people really cared about me, if they truly loved and understood me, they would just know what I needed. I shouldn't have to ask, right? If I was overwhelmed, a friend should notice and offer help. If I was hurt, the person who hurt me should sense it and make it right. If I wanted something, the people closest to me should be able to figure it out without me having to spell it out. I can laugh at it now, but in the moment, it felt real. And the truth underneath that belief was this. I wanted to be known without the risk of being vulnerable. I wanted to be understood without the discomfort of having to say, hey, this matters to me. Because asking for what you want, it's risky. It opens the door to rejection, disappointment, or maybe the hardest thing, being misunderstood. But here's the thing. Unspoken needs are rarely met. And when we expect people to read our minds, we set them up to fail. And I know what some of you might be thinking, but shouldn't the people who love me just know? It's a tempting thought, but it's a trap. The belief that love equals mind reading doesn't just hurt us, it damages our relationships. Because when we stay silent about what we want, we create invisible expectations. And when those expectations go unmet, because again, no one can read your mind, that silence turns into resentment. And resentment, it's like emotional corrosion. It eats away at trust and intimacy. Suddenly, the people you care about aren't just missing your needs. They're disappointing you in ways they don't even know about. I once spoke to someone who described years of frustration in her marriage. She felt unappreciated and unseen. She would go out of her way to take care of everything, managing the house, juggling schedules, but her partner never seemed to notice. When I asked if she'd ever told him how she felt, she paused, and then she said, well, no. Shouldn't he just see it? I get it. I really do. It would be nice if people could intuitively know exactly what we need and when, but that's not how human relationships work. Clarity isn't a burden, it's a gift. And here's where it gets even trickier. Sometimes we don't speak up because we're not even sure we deserve what we're asking for. Somewhere along the way, many of us learned that our needs were too much. Maybe you grew up in a family where asking for help was seen as weakness. Or maybe you learned early on that it was safer to stay quiet than risk conflict. Whatever the reason, a lot of us carry this unspoken fear that if we voice what we want, people will see us as needy or inconvenient. But here's the truth. Asking for what you need isn't a weakness, it's an act of courage. And I'm not talking about grand, sweeping declarations. Sometimes it's as simple as saying, hey, I need a break, or I'd really love your support with this, or even, I'd like to be included next time. These small, specific asks are how we teach people how to love us, not through assumption, but through honest communication. And when you don't speak up, you end up over-functioning and feeling unseen while the people around you are left wondering why you're quietly pulling away. It's a painful cycle, but the good news is you can break it. It starts by being willing to be uncomfortably clear. And I won't lie to you, this part is tough. If you're used to staying quiet, voicing what you want will feel awkward. There's a vulnerability to saying, I need this, because it exposes your heart. But here's the alternative. If you don't speak your truth, you end up sacrificing your needs on the altar of keeping the peace. And let me tell you, peace that comes at the cost of your voice isn't really peace, it's avoidance. And look, I know it's scary. I know the fear of being misunderstood or rejected can feel overwhelming. But here's what I also know. The people who truly love you want to get it right. They want to meet you where you are. But they can't do that if you're busy hiding what you need behind a wall of silence. So if you've been waiting for someone to read your mind, consider this your permission slip to stop. You don't have to wait. You get to ask. And when you do, you're not just inviting better support, you're building stronger, more honest relationships. And isn't that what we all want? To be loved, not for the version of us that's easy and convenient, but for who we really are. There's a difference between being liked and being loved. For a long time, I didn't know that. I thought if people liked me, if I was easy to be around, easy to agree with, easy to accommodate, then love would follow. I figured the more I shaped myself into what others wanted, the safer I'd be. After all, who wouldn't want to be liked? Being liked felt warm, it felt safe, it felt like belonging. Until it didn't. The problem is, when you spend your life chasing approval, you end up offering people a version of yourself that's been edited for their comfort. You give them the agreeable, polished, no trouble at all version, and it works. They like you. But that kind of liking is fragile, it's conditional, and deep down, you know it. Because if their affection depends on you staying small and agreeable, what happens the moment you speak up? What happens when you show them the parts of you that aren't so easy to please? I remember talking to someone who told me, everyone thinks I'm so easygoing, but the truth is, I'm just exhausted. And I knew exactly what she meant. She had spent years making herself smaller to keep the peace. She always said yes, even when she wanted to say no. She told me, I don't even know if people like me or if they just like how easy I make their lives. And there it was, the truth most of us are too afraid to say out loud. When you trade your authenticity for approval, you start to wonder, if they really knew me, if I stopped being so easy, would they still want me? And that question, it's terrifying. But here's what I've learned. Being liked is about fitting in. Being loved is about being seen. And the difference between the two is everything. When you're focused on being liked, you monitor yourself constantly. You measure your words, you smooth over your edges, you tell yourself, don't be too much, don't ask for too much, don't need too much. But love, real love, doesn't require that kind of performance. Real love can hold your wants, your boundaries, your whole messy humanity. But you can't receive that kind of love if you're too busy shape-shifting to avoid being a burden. And let's be honest, people-pleasing feels like a safer bet. If you keep everyone else happy, you reduce the risk of rejection. You avoid the discomfort of conflict. But that safety comes at a cost. You lose your voice. And over time, you start to lose yourself. And here's the hard truth. When you hide your true needs and desires to stay likable, you end up feeling lonely in your own relationships. You can be surrounded by people who enjoy your company, who invite you in, who say they care, and still feel unseen. Because how can anyone love the real you if you're always giving them a curated version? How can they support you if you never let them know what you actually need? And I know why we do it. The fear of rejection is primal. We're wired for connection, and the thought of losing it can make us do things that aren't always honest or healthy. But here's something that's just as true. If you have to abandon yourself to be loved, it's not real love. Love that requires you to shrink isn't love. It's approval with strings attached. And the people who genuinely love you, they don't need you to be easy. They need you to be real. They want the truth of who you are, your wants, your boundaries, your voice. Because the right people aren't just interested in the parts of you that are convenient. They want to know the whole story. And I'll be honest with you, being real means you might lose some people. Not everyone can handle your honesty. Not everyone will stick around when you stop over-managing for their comfort. But that's not a reflection of your worth. It's a reflection of what they were there for in the first place. And yes, losing approval is painful. but staying in relationships where you can't bring your full self, that's a much quieter, much deeper kind of pain. So what do you do with that? It starts with a question. Are you more committed to being liked or being loved? Because you can't have both. You can't keep everyone comfortable and expect to feel fully seen. At some point, you have to decide that your voice, your wants are worth the risk. And I won't lie to you, it's a risk, but it's the only way to know who's really in your corner. Because here's the truth, the people who love you don't need you to be easy. They need you to be you. And when you finally stop twisting yourself into what everyone else wants, you open the door to something better, something real. Because the best kind of love doesn't ask you to disappear. It invites you to show up fully and unapologetically yourself. And isn't that the kind of love we all deserve? Boundaries aren't walls, they're bridges. For a long time, I misunderstood what boundaries were. I thought setting a boundary meant pushing people away, building walls to keep myself safe, or cutting people off when things got tough. And if you're a people pleaser, the word boundary can feel a little harsh, maybe even selfish. After all, isn't it our job to be kind, flexible, and easy to get along with? Isn't that what good people do? But here's the truth. Boundaries aren't about keeping people out. They're about making sure the connection stays honest and healthy. Without them, relationships start to break down, not because people are bad or malicious, but because unspoken limits eventually breed resentment, exhaustion, and disconnection. I remember talking to someone who said, I don't even know who I am without other people's needs. She had spent years making herself available to everyone, saying yes to every request, bending over backward to keep the peace. And on the surface, she seemed like the kindest, most reliable person you could meet, but underneath, she was exhausted. She felt invisible. And worse, she felt trapped by the very relationship she had worked so hard to maintain. And I get it. When you're a people pleaser, saying no feels like a betrayal. You worry that setting limits means you'll be seen as cold or uncaring. But here's the irony. When you don't set boundaries, you start to resent the very people you're trying to please. And that resentment doesn't stay hidden. It leaks out in little ways. The sigh when someone asks for one more favor, the passive-aggressive comment, the quiet anger that bubbles up when your own needs keep getting pushed to the side. Here's what I know for sure. You cannot build honest relationships without boundaries. It's impossible. Because when you abandon yourself to make others comfortable, it's not kindness. It's self-betrayal, and you can't sustain that without paying a price. And I know the fear that comes with this. What if I set a boundary and someone leaves? What if I say no and I'm no longer needed? What if I disappoint people? But here's a question I want you to sit with. If a relationship can't survive your honest limits, was it ever really safe? And I don't mean that lightly. I know there's risk involved. Boundaries expose the truth of a relationship. They reveal who's willing to meet you where you are and who only values you when you're easy and convenient. And that's hard to face. But here's what I also know. The people who genuinely care about you want you to have boundaries because they want a relationship rooted in truth, not obligation. And let me be clear, boundaries aren't demands. They're not ultimatums. Boundaries sound like, I love you and I can't commit to this right now. Or, I care about you, but I'm not available for that. Or even, this is what I need to feel respected in our relationship. They are an invitation to deeper trust. To say, this is where I stand, can you meet me here? And something shifts when you start speaking your limits out loud. You stop walking around with invisible resentment. You stop expecting people to guess what you need. And most importantly, you give people the chance to show up for you in real, meaningful ways. And yes, some relationships will change. Not everyone will welcome your boundaries with open arms. When you stop overgiving, some people might pull away, not because you're doing something wrong, but because they were attached to the version of you who never said no. And while that loss is painful, it also brings a profound clarity. You start to see who is willing to love you, not for what you do, but for who you are. And I'll be honest, this isn't easy work. If you've spent a lifetime people-pleasing, the first time you set a boundary will feel like a risk. Your heart will race, you'll second-guess yourself, you might even feel guilty. But here's what I want you to remember. Boundaries are how we teach people to love us well. And the people who are meant to stay, they won't just tolerate your boundaries. They'll respect and honor them. And here's the most surprising part. When you start practicing healthy boundaries, your relationships actually get stronger. You stop resenting the people you love. You start showing up with more energy and presence. And instead of feeling drained by connection, you begin to feel nourished by it. Because the best relationships aren't built on exhaustion, they're built on mutual care, honesty, and respect. So if you've been afraid that setting boundaries will cost you connection, let me offer you this reframe. Boundaries don't break relationships, they reveal which ones were real to begin with. And the people who love you, they want the whole you, not just the version who makes their lives easier. Asking for what you want is an act of courage. It sounds simple, right? Just say the words, just ask. But if you've spent years people-pleasing, the idea of directly expressing your wants can feel anything but simple. It can feel terrifying. And for a lot of us, that fear isn't random. It's learned. Somewhere along the way, we got the message that asking for what we want is risky. Maybe we were told that having needs makes us a burden. Or maybe when we did speak up, we were met with rejection, dismissal, or silence. So we learned to shrink. We learned to wait and hope that someone would notice what we needed without us having to say a word. But here's the hard truth. Unspoken needs go unmet. And while it might feel safer to stay quiet, that silence comes with a cost. Over time, the things we push down don't disappear. They fester. The more we suppress our wants, the more resentment and disconnection build, and the relationships that once felt warm and fulfilling start to feel heavy, like we're carrying something no one else can see. I once had a conversation with someone who told me I feel invisible in my own life. She had spent years putting everyone else's needs before her own. At home, at work, even with friends, she always prioritized what made other people happy. And when I asked her why, she didn't speak up. Her answer was so honest, it stopped me in my tracks. She said, "I'm scared. What if I ask for what I want and they say no? Or worse, what if they say yes, but it doesn't really matter to them?" And that right there, that's the fear so many of us carry. Because asking for what we want isn't just about the words, it's about vulnerability. It's exposing the softest parts of ourselves. It's saying, "This matters to me," and trusting someone else to hold that truth with care. And the risk in doing that is real. There's no guarantee we'll get the answer we hope for. But here's what's also true. Not asking doesn't protect us from pain. It guarantees it. When we stay silent, when we settle for less than what we need, we start to disappear. We become spectators in our own lives, watching from the sidelines, hoping someone else will read our minds and meet us where we are. But real connection, deep, meaningful connection, can only happen when we're willing to be seen. And that means saying the words out loud. And I know there's a voice in your head that whispers, "Is it really worth it?" Maybe you've been disappointed before. Maybe you've convinced yourself that it's easier to meet other people's expectations than to risk the discomfort of naming your own. But I want to tell you something I've learned the hard way. When you don't ask for what you want, you teach people that your needs don't matter. And over time, you start to believe that yourself. And listen, I get it. This isn't easy work. It's vulnerable, it's messy, and there's no script that guarantees the perfect outcome. But what I know for sure is this. The people who truly love you want to know what you need. They don't want the polite, edited version of you who says, "I'm fine," when you're not. They want to know when something matters. They want the chance to meet you there. But they can't do that if you never give them the opportunity. And here's the thing, asking for what you want doesn't mean you'll always get it. There will be times when people can't meet your needs. But when you ask directly, you stop living in a place of quiet resentment and start living in a place of clarity. And clarity is a gift. Even when the answer isn't what you hope for, knowing where you stand is always better than wondering in silence. And if you're still unsure, if the idea of asking for what you want feels too big, too risky, I want you to start here. Your wants are not a burden. Let me say that again. Your wants are not a burden. They're part of what makes you human, and the people who truly care about you don't love you in spite of your needs. They love you because you're real enough to name them. So here's my challenge to you. What's one thing you've been afraid to ask for? What's one place where you've been shrinking, staying small to keep the peace? And what would it mean to give yourself permission to speak that truth out loud? Because the life you want, the relationships you deserve, they begin the moment you stop waiting to be understood and start asking for what you really need. And yes, it's vulnerable, but it's also the bravest, most life-giving thing you'll ever do. At the heart of it all, this isn't just about stopping people pleasing or learning to ask for what you want. It's about choosing to show up fully in your own life. It's about realizing that your needs, your voice, and your truth matter. And when you stop sacrificing yourself to make others comfortable, something shifts. You stop living from a place of exhaustion and start living from a place of authenticity. And that's where real connection begins. Will it be easy? No. It takes courage to break free from patterns that have kept you safe for so long. It takes bravery to speak your truth when silence has felt safer. But here's what I want you to hold on to. You are worthy of relationships where your voice is heard, your needs are honored, and your truth is welcomed. So here's your invitation. Start small, but start. Practice asking for what you want, set the boundary, say no when you mean no, and trust that the people who truly love you will meet you there. And when it feels hard, because it will, remember this. Your worth has never been tied to how much you do for others. It has always been rooted in who you are. You deserve to be seen, you deserve to be heard, and you deserve to live a life that reflects what matters most to you. Good luck. You've got this.